Hey guys, welcome back to Kingdom Inspired Kids Podcast, the place where parents talk, learn, grow, and feel understood. I'm your host and founder, Calvette Boyd. Listen, if you're raising, teaching, loving, or supporting a child with ADHD, you're absolutely in the right place at the right time today for this message. Here on this podcast, we have honest conversations about real challenges, real emotions, and real strategies for navigating the ADHD journey. Of course, without guilt, without shame, and without unrealistic expectations. Because ADHD doesn't just affect children, it affects the parents as well. A lot of times we think, we feel, we respond, we cope, and it might not be the way we necessarily should. And today we're diving into a topic that is far more common and far more damaging than most people ever even talk about. Have you ever noticed that many ADHD struggles aren't just about being distracted or forgetting or not finishing tasks, but about how you feel or how your children feel after those things happen? They've missed their responsibilities. They forgot to clean their room. They forgot to do their chores. They repeated reminders, so they hit snooze a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. The plans that somehow fall apart again and again. The moments that leave you wondering if you're doing something wrong as a parent, or worse, if your child is. For many families affected by ADHD, the hardest part isn't the mistake itself. It's the emotional storm that follows. The frustration, the guilt, the self-blame as parents, the quiet thoughts that no one else hears, the brokenheartedness that you feel, that internal voice that's saying to you, why is this still happening? Why can't we get this under control? Am I failing my child? What am I doing wrong? Today, we're talking about something that silently shapes the lives of both parents and children with ADHD, and that is the ADHD shame cycle. Oh my goodness. What is it? Why it happens? Why is it so persistent? And mostly, how, as parents, do we begin to break free from it? If this conversation feels like something you've been dealing with, you are absolutely in the right place. Listen, I want to share a personal story about what happened to me just this morning. So this morning I got up, I prayed. I really sought God. I really prayed, and I cried out to God about some things that I'm really grateful for. And then I started to pray about some things. And I just knew it would be an amazing day. I just knew that it would be a really great day. And what happened is I got up really early. I did my prayer and spent some time with God, and prayed for how my day would go. And then I somehow lost track of time. I lost track of time, which put me rushing. So I had to go and pick my daughter up because she actually spent the night with her sister. So I had to go and pick my daughter up. And when I got there to pick her up, she was like, well, I need something to eat for breakfast. Well, just last night, we talked about making sure that you take you something so that you'll have something for breakfast in the morning. Well, of course, she didn't do that. And I don't know about you parents, but a lot of kids in the generation that my kid is a teenager. So a lot of these teenagers think that they're always supposed to eat out. I don't know. My mom says that we created that as parents, but I think a lot of it is social media. I think it's their peers. I think it's the peer pressure and those kinds of things. But anyway, my daughter wanted to go and get something to eat. And I said, we talked about this last night. Like, I have to be at work at 8 o'clock. So there's no way possible that I can stop and get you something to eat. Parents, I don't know if you have the kind of kid that I have, but my kid began to walk. Okay. My daughter began to walk, and she said to me, well, I'm going to walk to the store and get me something to eat. Well, by this time, like, as a parent, I didn't want to get into a debate or or have to see the frustration and the anger and all of the emotion. Like, I didn't want to deal with it this morning. I was like, well, okay. So I went ahead and took some things into my daughter's house. And when I came back, my daughter was literally walking up the street. And so I let her walk. And I said, hey, listen, if you're going to school, like, I've got to drop you off. I have to be at work at 8. You got to get in the car. So she gets in the car and she tells me that she really wants something to eat. And I'm like, why didn't you do this before? Then her sister's frustrated. Her sister's like, I told you I had something to eat. Why didn't you get something to eat? Well, if you have these children with ADHD, sometimes that emotional roller coaster, you start to see the changes and the things that go on with that, like the behavior starts to shift. You immediately see the shifting. And so she's saying, well, I can't eat. I can't take my medicine on an empty stomach, Mom. I got to have something to eat. And so by now I'm like super, super frustrated. And I'm like, God, I already prayed about this morning. Like, why are we going through this? And so needless to say, I headed to school and I started to explain, listen, I feel like you don't care that I have to be at work at 8 o'clock. And we've had this discussion for years and we're talking about the same thing over and over and over. And nothing is changing. Like, you still want me to stop and I don't have time to stop. And so I said, it's like 7:40. If I don't drop you off by 7:45, I won't be able to get to my job by 8 o'clock. So the thought process as a parent, I start thinking, okay, they're going to call me from the school. They're going to tell me that she has had a meltdown. They're going to tell me that she's sick or she's throwing up or something to pull me away from work. So that's where my mind immediately went. And my mind should have gone immediately to prayer, but my mind, it was a distraction and my mind started going everywhere else. So I pulled into McDonald's at 7:40, knowing that I didn't have the time, of course. And I ended up staying in line, and I was late. I dropped her off at school like 7:42, 7:44. I was leaving McDonald's. I dropped her off at school. And when I get to the school to drop her off, there's line of buses lined up because they can't get into the school until like 7:45. So there's a line of buses, and the parents that are dropping their children off, they wait for all the kids to get off the buses instead of, there's like 2 lines where there's a bus line and then there's a car rider line or drop off line. And that didn't happen. So needless to say, I ended up getting to work about 8:06, I think it was. And I really needed to be here at 8:05, but 8:06. And one of my peers says to me, hey, you need to make sure that you're on time because there's some snitches and they'll tell on you. And I'm like, listen, I've already covered those bases. I've already informed the supervisor that I was going to be late and why I was going to be late. And so I'm here. But I want to share a detail that I left out. When I dropped my daughter off and she got out of the car, I said, hey, I looked at her and I said, hey, I love you. I know we went through a lot this morning, but I love you. And she didn't say anything. And I said, hey, listen, I love you. And she turned and she looked at me and she said, I love you too. And when she closed the car door, I saw her face. And she turned and she looked at me. And there was like this blank stare. And she said to me, Mama, sometimes I might not understand time. And that is something that I had shared with her sister. I said she does not understand the concept of time. And it put us in a bad situation. And it made our morning really, really hard. So I said all that to say, when I walked into the job this morning, I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. Even though nobody else knew what was going on, nobody knows as a parent the shame that you deal with, the embarrassment that you deal with. And it is this vicious ADHD shame cycle. And it's like an emotional loop that many children and adults experience over and over and over again. It often looks like struggle. Like you're an adult, you couldn't get to work on time, or you couldn't get your kid together on time to get to school, you couldn't have left earlier. It looks like a mistake. Like, how did you as an adult lose track of time? And then there's a criticism. There was a criticism this morning for me that was, my peer said to me, it's above my pay grade. I'm not a snitch. I don't get paid to snitch. But there are snitches around here and they'll tell on you if you're late. The emotional pain and the hurt that we feel as parents, the avoidance, so we try not to discuss too much, or we try not to discuss any of it at all, and we try to create it, we create this space where we close people out and close things out. We create more struggles. But let's make this real. This is a real thing. This ADHD shame cycle. Your child might have forgotten their Chromebook today, or they forget their homework, and you're already at work. They get corrected or disciplined. They're embarrassed. They feel embarrassed, frustrated, and defeated the same way we do sometimes as parents. They start believing something negative about themselves, like, I'm dumb, I'm always in trouble, I can't do anything right. Those feelings don't disappear. Those feelings, they linger, and they can change a person. It can begin to change and shape your character into something that you don't want it to be. You don't want that for your children, and you don't want it for yourself. And sometimes instead of the children, because remember, their brain's not fully closed, like the decision-making part of their brain is not fully closed, they start to, instead of trying harder, they start to they avoid tasks, they avoid responsibility, they avoid situations where they might fail. It's kind of like as a wall. You ever heard or read in the Bible when it says, guard your heart? So sometimes children are guarding their heart so that they don't, by not doing their task or not doing their responsibilities, because they feel like, if I do it and I don't do it right, I'm going to be criticized again and again and again. And these things, this ADHD embarrassment, leads to, it can lead to more problems and more repeated cycles. Now, let me shift gears a little bit. Why ADHD brains are so vulnerable to shame? Children with ADHD live with a constant performance inconsistency. One day, they may focus beautifully. Another day, they struggle with things that are clearly things that they know, and they know how to do it, but they might not do it exactly the way it's supposed to be done. So this unpredictability creates repeated negative experiences. And that was what I saw this morning on my daughter's face when she turned and looked at me. I saw the hurt, the pain, the embarrassment, the humiliation. I saw the hurt. And these things create that unpredictability, like you don't know if you're going to be corrected more often than your peers or your siblings. You feel behind on task despite your effort. You're forgetting things, they're forgetting things that they genuinely intended to do. I'll give you an example. Hey, sweetie, did you turn out the light before you left out of your room? I can't tell you how many times I've trusted when she said yes, and I go back home after being gone to work all day and the light is on. So now what I've started to do is I ask, hey, did you make sure you turned the light off? And then I let her go out in front of me and I make sure that the lights are off. To some people, especially older generations, they would say things like, I don't know why you have to continue to do that. And as old as she is, or as old as your kids are, you shouldn't have to continue to repeat yourself. But what people don't understand is if you don't have a child with ADHD, or if you do have a child with ADHD and you don't understand the shame and how it works, then it's really kind of hard to give advice if you haven't been through it, or you haven't seen it, or you haven't helped someone navigate through it. They feel misunderstood by adults. That's what my daughter felt this morning. I saw that as well. I could see it in her eyes. Comparing themselves to their siblings or their classmates. She does it all the time. I'm not the perfect child like, her sister. Or I'm not the perfect student like, my cousin or my friends or like other people's kids. Over time, external feedback from people, I call them word curses. Over time, those word curses that people have given you or spoken over your family, they can become internal belief. What happened turns out to be what's wrong with me. And this is where shame becomes dangerous. Because shame does not attach to behavior. Shame attaches to identity. Let me say that again. Shame does not attach to behavior. Shame attaches to identity. Instead of thinking, I forgot my homework at home today, the child starts thinking, I'm the kind of person who forgets everything. That shift has massive psychological consequences. And if you have not lived it, you don't understand. But why shame makes ADHD symptoms worse? Here's something that surprises many parents. Shame doesn't motivate improvement. I remember when I was young, the older people would say to us, oh, you're lazy. Or they would say to kids, you're lazy. You need to get up and do something. You're lazy. That doesn't work today. Because today, what happens is when you say that to kids, it does not motivate them. The shame actually worsens. Why? Because shame increases things like stress, anxiety, emotional overwhelm, fear of failure, and mental exhaustion. Put yourself in the shoes of a person that has ADHD. A stressed brain cannot plan well. An anxious brain cannot focus well. An overwhelmed brain cannot regulate emotions well. So the child is no longer dealing with ADHD by itself. They're dealing with ADHD plus the emotional weight of the word curses that have been spoken over them, which often leads to more forgetfulness, more avoidance, more emotional outbursts, and more shames. Signs a child may be stuck in the shame cycle. This cycle is not always obvious. It often hides behind behaviors parents misinterpret. Your child may be experiencing shame if you notice things like extreme reactions to small mistakes, avoidance of doing their homework or their responsibilities, statements like, I'm stupid, I can't do this, giving up quickly when things seem hard, perfectionism, trying to make sure things are perfect, or they have the fear of trying to do things because it won't be perfect, meltdowns because they're frustrated, unmotivated, despite they have the ability to do it. Very often it looks like defiance when it's actually protection. It's actually them trying to guard their heart. The child is trying to avoid the emotional pain of feeling like they failed again. Now, let me share a little bit more about the adult shame cycle when you have children with ADHD. As a parent, I've been told I didn't raise my kids right. I've been told that I should have beat their butts. I've been told you've given your kids too much. You do too much for your kids. You take your kids too many places. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the parent. Put yourself in my shoes. You've got a child or children, and your child or children have a hard time, maybe not making friends, but keeping them. Or you have children that people don't want to be around because they are so emotionally, they call it emotionally disturbed, but where your children are defiant, but they're really trying to protect themselves. But people on the outside that don't know what's going on, they see it as defiance. Or people that the schools call you, and the schools, I can tell you guys so many stories. Oh my gosh. But I have to be careful as to what I say. But the times when the schools have called me, hey mom, and you can hear the negative energy. This is why your child doesn't do X, Y, and Z. Or, hey mom, your child is having an outburst again today. And it's almost like they're frustrated. When I want to say, if you're frustrated in the classroom, then get out of the classroom. Or if you're frustrated dealing with kids every day, don't be in the school system. Because if an administrator calls me or calls you as a parent, and they call you and they speak to you that way, how do you really think they're treating your child when they're at school? And I want to sit that right there, and I really want you guys to think about that. In the beginning, it may be like they may call and they're, hey mom, Johnny's having an outburst today, and we've tried to calm him down and he's not calmed down. Can you come and get him? Because guess what? They don't want to deal with it. Or there's few and far between where there are people who really understand, and that is their passion and their calling, and that's what they want to do. But I want you to think about, if a parent is being talked to kind of harsh or disrespectful, then how do you think they're treating your children? And we wonder why our children act the way they do. I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, it starts at home." It does start at home. But I can tell you, it's not that I have not tried to be a great parent and not try to raise my children right, but they have their own brain and they make decisions that might not be the best decisions when they're away from me as well as when they're with me. Nobody's perfect except Jesus Christ. Everybody has sinned and fallen short of God's glory. So I really want you guys to think about it. If you have a kid with ADHD, or if you have friends and their kids have ADHD, or teachers, or educators, tutors, I want you to think about it. It's not just the kid going through, it's the parent that goes through it as well. And the only way that we are going to break this shame cycle is if everybody plays along. From the house, the parents, the siblings, the guardians, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the friends, other parents, and educators, because you play a part in this too. Our children are with educators more than they are with us throughout the day. You guys are the example, not just the parents. You guys are an example. And if you are talking to these children, think about the shame cycle and what they go through as well as what parents go through. The only way we're going to break this cycle is through prayer and through persevering and understanding exactly what needs to be done. Parents have tremendous influence over interrupting this parent, not by lowering your standards, parents, but by changing how struggles are framed. Instead of saying things like, "You're so forgetful," try saying something like, "We forgot our homework today. Let's figure out a system." Instead of identity language, use situational language. This protects self-worth while still addressing responsibility. The next thing is replace blame with curiosity. ADHD challenges are rarely solved by pressure. They are usually solved by investigation. Your child ever gotten in trouble for making a decision at school, and then when the administrator went in and did an investigation, they resolved it and the child was like, "Oh, I could have done something different"? Same thing. Ask your child, what made this hard today? What got in the way? What would help next time? Curiosity, asking curious questions instead of directly blaming, it reduces the shame. Shame reduction improves cooperation. And then your children or your students will start to cooperate more. In other words, treat them like they're human. The next thing I want you to do is think about is normalize brain differences. Kids with ADHD often assume their struggles mean that they're flawed. Parents and educators can refrain from, "Your brain works differently. This is common with ADHD. This is a skill we can build." Difficulty becomes something to work with, not something to be ashamed of. One more time, difficulty becomes something to work with, not something to be ashamed of. The next thing I want you to do is focus on micro successes. Shame feeds on repeated failure narratives. Confidence feeds on small wins. So celebrate progress, like starting with resistance, remembering one step, using a tool identity, recovering from frustration faster. Small victories rebuild their identity and their self-motivation. The next thing I want you to shift to is model self-compassion. Children internalize how parents react to mistakes. If parents respond with harshness, children learn self-criticism. If parents respond with calm problem solving, children learn resilience. Your tone becomes their inner voice. When God speaks to us and he gets onto us for things that we shouldn't be doing, he responds in love. And as parents and educators, that's what we should be doing too. Not just with children with ADHD, but with anyone. The big truth parents need to hear. Many ADHD behaviors are not character issues. They are regulation issues. I've talked about that time and time again. It's not laziness, but it's the initiation difficulty. It's not irresponsibility, but working memory challenges. It's not defiance, but it's being overwhelmed. When parents or educators interpret symptoms as moral failures, shame grows. When parents interrupt symptoms as brain mechanics, then those solutions begin to emerge. I want you parents and children not to get frustrated. Don't get disappointed. Don't get in this vicious cycle of this ADHD shame cycle, because I can tell you that it happens. I was in it today. But if this conversation felt personal, that's because it is. This is my personal story. I've lived with it for years. But the only way we're going to grow from it is if we learn from it and how to navigate through. The ADHD shame cycle impacts children, parents, entire households, sometimes quietly and sometimes invisibly. But awareness changes everything, because once you can see the cycle, you can stop feeding that vicious cycle. You can replace shame with understanding, replace blame with strategy, replace guilt with growth. And that's exactly why we have these conversations here. If you found value in today's episode, make sure you're following the Kingdom Inspired Kids podcast, where parents talk, where we're real, where I'm very open and transparent about how to navigate through this. And share this with another parent, an educator, a guardian, a grandparent who needs the reminder that they are not alone in this journey. And if you want to be more real, practical, life-changing, and see conversations like this, be sure to stay connected with us through the CTR Media Network. You can also follow me on all social media platforms, where we are committed to delivering content that empowers families, strengthens parents, and transforms how we think about challenges of ADHD. Thank you for spending your time with me today. And remember, you're not failing as a parent. Your child is not broken, and growth is always possible. I'll see you on our next episode, and I hope you guys have a great and awesome remaining rest